He told me he was broken, but I was the one living in pieces. It started with a whisper, soft and heavy against my neck. I'm not easy to love. It felt deep, poetic even. I thought it meant vulnerability. Now I know it was a warning. The first crack in a mask I spent years trying not to see. To everyone else, Daniel was intense, charming, damaged. A man haunted by childhood wounds, failed relationships, and the weight of never being understood. I stepped into the role he quietly cast for me, the healer, the patient one, the woman who would finally love him right. I believed all he needed was time, gentleness, more of me. The first few months felt like a movie. Late-night calls just to hear my voice, surprise visits with coffee, deep stares that made me feel chosen. But between all the affection came the first disappearances, long, cold stretches of silence. When I asked what was wrong, he'd sigh and say, "You're too sensitive. You overthink everything." I began apologizing for asking simple questions, for needing attention, for being hurt when he ignored me for days. He said I was suffocating, that he needed space, that love didn't mean constant validation. It didn't feel like emotional abuse. It felt like I was too much. I remember the night we went to his cousin's birthday. He didn't introduce me to anyone, barely looked at me. I sat on the edge of the couch, trying not to make a scene. Later, in the car, when I told him how it made me feel, he laughed. Cold, dismissive. "You really think everything is about you, huh?" Then came silence. Days of blocked calls, punishment, control. I started tiptoeing around everything, my words, my tone, even how I breathed. Being with a narcissist means shrinking so small you barely exist. With each new cycle of manipulation, I thought I was getting closer to healing him, to proving I was different, that I could save him where others had failed. But he never wanted to be saved. He just needed someone willing to bleed for him without asking why. The lies were always wrapped in guilt. A deleted message on his phone. I was invading his privacy. A whole day without hearing from him. I was too needy, too emotional. Gaslighting became routine. I started questioning my own memory, my own reality. Was I being dramatic? Was I imagining the distance, the disdain? Or had I just forgotten how it felt to be loved without cruelty? There was my birthday. I'll never forget that. He never showed up. Sent a text at 11:47 p.m. "Sorry, I've got a lot on my mind. Don't pressure me." I spent the night alone, staring at the cake I bought for myself, mascara smudged from crying in the dark. A week later, he came back with flowers and soft lies. "You're the only one who's ever really seen me." And I smiled, because loving a narcissist means swallowing broken glass and still saying thank you. I thought I was loving a broken man, but he shattered me in places I didn't know could break. The cruelest part of psychological abuse is that no one sees the wounds, not even you. Now, whenever I hear the words toxic relationship, I feel sick, because I lived it. I've tasted every part of narcissistic abuse, the love bombing, the gaslighting, the silent treatment, the manipulation masked as devotion. I was the victim, and I still blamed myself, for needing too much, for trying too hard, for believing. The worst part? Some days I still wish he'd come back, just to prove I mattered. The trauma doesn't leave when the narcissist does. It stays. It lives under your skin. It stays in the way I flinch when someone takes too long to reply, in how I second-guess every text I write, afraid it might sound clingy, in the way I apologize before asking for anything. Love, attention, space, like I have no right to need, like wanting to be seen as some kind of shame. After Daniel left, or rather, after he discarded me like I was a phase he'd outgrown, there was no closure. Narcissists don't offer endings. They vanish, leaving you hollow, confused, and addicted to the very person who broke you. He didn't just leave a silence. He left a void that screamed. And I tried to fill it with logic, with therapy, with journaling, with prayer. But none of it answered the one question that haunted me at night. Was any of it real? Because that's the genius of narcissistic abuse. The way it rewires your brain to crave the pain, to mistake manipulation for meaning. The highs were euphoric, but they were never safe. He knew exactly when to withhold affection, when to breadcrumb me back, when to offer just enough to keep me starving. That wasn't love. It was psychological abuse disguised as romance. People ask why I didn't leave sooner. But how do you leave someone who convinced you that their love is your only chance at happiness? I remember one night, months after he was gone, I found a sweater of his in my closet. I buried my face in it and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Not because I missed him, but because I missed the version of me that believed I could be enough to fix someone that broken. She was naive, but she was hopeful. And now she's gone too. Being with a narcissist doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your sense of self. They don't steal your love. They teach you to hate yourself for ever giving it. Healing hasn't been linear. Some days I feel strong. Others, I still hear his voice in my head. Mocking, distant, cold. His words live in the corners of my mind, in the doubts I carry, in the shame that still clings to my ribs. That's what emotional abuse does. It doesn't leave bruises, it leaves beliefs. I'm not sure when I'll fully trust again, or if I'll ever be able to love without fear. But I know this: I don't need to be someone's cure anymore. I don't need to be consumed to feel valuable, and I don't need his chaos to feel alive. But sometimes, in the quiet, I still wonder if he ever thinks of me, if he ever looks back and knows what he destroyed, and then I hate myself for even caring, because I thought I could fix the narcissist. But he ended up breaking me. The pieces he left behind don't fit together the same anymore. I've tried to rebuild. Friends told me to move on. Therapists told me to reclaim my identity, and I nodded through it all like a good survivor. But the truth is, trauma doesn't ask for permission. It creeps in quietly, in smells, in songs, in shadows. It doesn't scream, it whispers, just like he did. Some nights, I still dream of him. Not the real him, the version he sold me. The wounded boy who only needed someone patient enough to stay. In the dreams, he's crying. He says he's sorry. He says he's changed. And I always wake up with tears on my pillow and a heart full of rage. Because I know it's a lie. The narcissist never cries for you, only for himself. I used to replay everything, like a crime scene I couldn't stop investigating. What could I have said differently? What if I hadn't questioned him that night? What if I had been quieter, more understanding, less emotional? That's the final cruelty of narcissistic abuse. It turns the victim into the villain of their own memory. I became my own jailer, keeping myself trapped in loops of guilt over a relationship built on control, emotional abuse, and manipulation. And still, a part of me craved the chaos. That's the addiction no one talks about. The way toxic love makes the normal feel dull. The constant high and crash. The thrill of being seen, then ignored, then begged for, then discarded. The love bombing, the silent treatment, the gaslighting. It's not just pain, it's programming. It teaches you to associate unpredictability with passion, and it makes healing feel empty. I tried dating again. Once. The man was kind, attentive. He listened when I spoke, and I panicked. I kept waiting for the switch. The coldness, the correction, the cruel joke masked as a tease. When it never came, I started to pull away. Because when you've been the victim of narcissistic abuse, real kindness feels suspicious. One day I found an old note from him in my drawer. A small torn scrap of paper. "I don't deserve you, but I'll ruin you anyway." He said it like a joke once, after sex. I laughed. I thought it was dark humor. I didn't realize it was a prophecy. The narcissist doesn't destroy you all at once. He takes you piece by piece, until you forget who you were before him. It's not that he didn't love me. It's that he only knew how to love himself. And even that, he did violently. Now I live differently. I take up space on purpose. I speak without shrinking. I cry without apology. And some days, I still carry the weight of his voice in my chest, but I also carry something else. The quiet, growing truth that I survived him. But surviving isn't the same as healing. Some wounds aren't meant to close. Some just teach you to walk carefully around the scar. And some nights, I still look at my reflection and ask, who was I before he taught me to disappear? I think the worst part is, I don't remember her. The woman I was before him, before the manipulation, the gaslighting, the cycles of affection and abandonment, feels like a dream I woke up from too fast. Blurry, faint. A version of me that used to smile without flinching, speak without apology, love without fear. I try to reach her sometimes, in photos, in old journal entries, in music she used to dance to. but she doesn't look back. He made sure of that, because that's what a narcissist does. They don't just love bomb you. They erase you, slowly, strategically. So you confuse their control for protection, their criticism for guidance, their indifference for depth. He didn't want me healed. He wanted me dependent. He wanted me doubting myself, afraid to breathe too loud or shine too bright. And I gave in. I dimmed everything. I became fluent in silence, in waiting, in wondering if today he would be warm or cruel. One night, I remember standing in our kitchen, barefoot, holding a plate he'd just thrown against the wall. It shattered near my feet, but he didn't flinch. He just stared at me with that blank, cold look I'd come to know too well. I whispered, "Why do you hate me so much?" And he said without blinking, "If you think this is hate, you don't know me at all." He was right. I didn't know him. I only knew the mask. And worse, I loved the mask. That's the sickness of emotional abuse. You fall in love with the version of them they pretend to be, and then you stay for the punishment because you keep hoping the mask will come back. You tell yourself he's just scared. He's wounded. He doesn't mean it. If I can just love him harder, softer, better, maybe this time he'll stay. But narcissistic abuse isn't about love. It's about control, about power, about keeping you small enough that you'll never leave, but strong enough that you can still serve a purpose. They don't want partners. They want mirrors. And once you stop reflecting what they need, they shatter you. There were days I couldn't cry because I thought feeling pain meant I was weak. Now I know. Surviving his love was the strongest thing I've ever done. People think the worst part is when the narcissist leaves. No, it's when they come back, and you want them to. I wish I could say I never answered his last message, that when he texted, "You'll always be mine, no matter what," I deleted it without a thought. But that would be a lie. I stared at it for hours, because trauma bonds don't break clean. They unravel slowly, with shame, with sweat, with sobbing on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., holding yourself because no one else knows what you've survived. I didn't answer him, but I also didn't delete it. It still sits there, a reminder, a warning. And some nights, when I forget how far I've come, I reread it, not because I miss him, but because part of me still misses being wanted, even if it came with a price. But I know now, I was never his to begin with. He just borrowed me until I couldn't recognize my reflection anymore. And I wonder if one day, when he's alone in whatever mess he's made next, will he ever realize I was the only person who saw the cracks and still tried to stay? Will he remember my love, or just the control he lost? I'll never know, but I still close my eyes and hear his voice, and I still wake up trying to forget it was ever mine. Some mornings I wake up, and my first instinct is to check my phone, not because I expect a message from him, but because for so long, my day started with his silence, that aching, deliberate silence, the kind that wasn't just absence, it was punishment. He knew exactly how to make me feel invisible. He'd read my messages and leave them unanswered for hours, sometimes days, just to remind me how small I was. And the worst part? I let it work. I'd reread what I sent, analyzing every word, every emoji, wondering if I sounded too desperate, too needy, too emotional, too much. I was always too much, or not enough, depending on what served him that week. That's the loop you live in with a narcissist. You're never standing on solid ground. One moment you're a goddess, the next you're a burden. One moment he's holding your face like you're sacred, the next he's rolling his eyes because you dared to feel something. I learned to swallow my needs like poison, learned to be proud of how little I asked for. What I called love was just survival. There was a night, close to the end, when I finally broke in front of him. Not loud, not dramatic, just empty. I stood in the hallway of our apartment, my hands shaking, and said quietly, "I can't do this anymore." He didn't ask why. He didn't come closer. He just scoffed and said, "You always make everything about you." And in that moment, something in me snapped, not out of anger, out of clarity. That was the first time I realized I was never going to be seen. Not really. Not fully. Not by him. The damage he caused wasn't just emotional. It was neurological. My body forgot how safety felt, how calm felt. My nervous system stayed in fight or flight mode, waiting for the next withdrawal, the next sarcastic jab, the next cycle of cruelty disguised as just being honest. It was psychological abuse dressed up as intensity, romanticized pain. And I was the perfect victim, eager to please, terrified to be left. The narcissist doesn't love you. He loves your devotion, your silence, your willingness to burn for him and call it loyalty. I wasn't in a relationship. I was in a performance I didn't audition for, playing a role that demanded my soul. It took months of no contact to begin hearing my own voice again. At first, it sounded foreign, like someone I used to know. She was angry, she was grieving, but she was alive. And slowly, she began to speak louder than his memory. I've stopped explaining my pain to people who've never loved a narcissist. They don't get it. They think abuse looks like bruises, not bedtime apologies and birthday absences. They don't understand how the trauma bonds form, how the smallest kindness from him could undo weeks of emotional starvation. I used to beg for crumbs. Now I'm learning to expect whole meals. But healing is a brutal kind of freedom. Because now I have to live with the memory of what I allowed, of how deeply I betrayed myself, just to keep being chosen by someone who never truly saw me. He broke me, yes, but I handed him the hammer. Every time I made excuses, every time I stayed, every time I believed love could fix him. And still, sometimes I miss the high, the way he used to look at me like I was magic, before he made me feel like a curse. I wonder if that's what trauma really is, missing the poison that nearly killed you, craving the fire even after it's burned everything down. There are still ashes inside me, still shadows where light should be, and maybe that's what's left after a narcissist. Not closure, not healing, just echoes, and a name I no longer speak out loud. Some nights I still hear his footsteps, even though he's long gone, and the floors are different, and the door he once slammed no longer exists. But my body remembers. The tightening in my chest when the key turned in the lock, that second of silence before he spoke, when I had to brace myself and guess which version of him was walking in. Would it be the warm one who'd kiss my forehead and ask about my day, or the cold shadow who'd toss his bag down, sigh heavily, and let his silence do the punishing? Living with a narcissist means learning to predict storms by the sound of the wind. I became an expert in reading his moods before he even said a word. A raised eyebrow meant be quiet. A deep breath meant change the subject. A tight smile meant don't bring up anything that matters. I lived in a house with walls, but no safety. And yet, I thought it was love. Because he said it was. Because when I cried, he wiped my tears, after making me cry. Because when I begged, he held me, after making me beg. That's the twisted rhythm of emotional abuse. He hurt me, then healed me, just enough to keep me hopeful, just enough to keep me hooked. He told me once, in the middle of a fight I didn't know we were having, "You're lucky I haven't left yet. No one else would put up with this." And I believed him. God, I believed him. He'd already broken my confidence down so carefully, so subtly, that I clung to his cruelty like it was proof I mattered. I told myself this is just what relationships are like. But deep down, something inside me, the part of me that hadn't been silenced yet, whispered, "No, this isn't love. This is control." The most dangerous thing a narcissist steals isn't your time, your trust, or your body. It's your belief in yourself. They make you doubt your own instincts, until you need them to tell you who you are. I used to stare at my reflection and search for her, the woman who smiled easily, who had friends, who wore red lipstick without worrying it would be too much. She started disappearing the moment I began bending to fit inside his shrinking idea of me. I stopped laughing too loudly. I stopped wearing certain dresses. I stopped talking about dreams that didn't involve him. That's how the narcissist wins. Not through screaming or slamming doors, but through erosion. Tiny, daily cuts that bleed you dry. 1,000 almosts and maybes, and you're imagining it. I've come a long way. I've rebuilt parts of myself I thought were gone forever. But I still flinch at sudden kindness, still brace for abandonment and silence, still wonder if healing means forgetting, or just learning to live with the knowing. People say, "At least he's out of your life now," as if the absence erases the damage. But narcissistic abuse isn't just a chapter. It's a blueprint your brain tries to follow. Even after he's gone, you learn to love carefully, speak cautiously, apologize for existing, because that's what the trauma taught you. Survival means self-erasure. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live, without looking over my shoulder, without second-guessing my joy, without fearing that loving someone will cost me myself again. I wish I could say I'm free, but the truth is, Some cages don't have bars. They have echoes. And mine still whisper his name. Some mornings, I still check the mirror and wonder who I'm performing for. Not him, not anymore, but the residue of his gaze still lives behind my eyes. I fix my hair the way he used to like. I hesitate before wearing anything he once called attention-seeking. I smile politely when men speak, even when I want to disappear. It's like I'm still trying to avoid a punishment that's no longer coming. That's what psychological abuse does. It doesn't end when the narcissist leaves. It settles in. It becomes a language your body speaks fluently, without asking permission. Hypervigilance, people-pleasing, the constant urge to apologize for taking up space. That was his legacy. That's what he left behind when he walked out without a goodbye. Just a ghost that still knows how to open doors inside me I've tried to lock. I remember the last time I saw him. The real last time. He stood in front of me, arms crossed, his voice low and venomous. You were never enough for me, but thanks for trying. Then he turned and left. No drama, no tears, just the end of something that had already been ending for a long, long time. I didn't chase him, not because I didn't want to, but because I physically couldn't move. I stood there in that hallway, his words echoing off the walls like a final curse. Not enough, not enough, not enough. I collapsed that night, on the floor, in the dark, not because he left, but because I realized I had nothing left to give anyone, not even myself. That's the part they don't tell you about surviving a toxic relationship with a narcissist. It's not just heartbreak, it's soul depletion. It's realizing you poured everything you had into someone who was a bottomless pit, and now you're the one who's empty. You don't heal by hating them. You heal by forgiving yourself for staying. I wasn't weak. I was loyal. And he weaponized that until I forgot how to stand alone. There are days now when I catch glimpses of her, the woman I was before him. Not in mirrors, not in old photos, but in moments, like when I laugh too loudly and don't cover my mouth, or when I say no without 1,000 explanations, or when I walk into a room and don't shrink. I've stopped trying to be low maintenance. I've stopped making myself smaller to make someone else feel bigger. But the healing, it's not pretty. It's not poetic. It's crying in parked cars. It's deleting his number and then retyping it from memory. It's seeing his name in a crowd and forgetting how to breathe, even when you know it's not him. Healing is lonely, because no one claps for the private victories, like finally sleeping through the night without dreaming of his voice, or walking past a man who reminds you of him and not feeling your stomach drop. But I count those moments. I hold on to them, because they're proof that I'm still here, still rebuilding, still remembering who I was before he convinced me I was nothing. I don't need revenge. I don't even need closure. I just need to keep choosing myself in the small, quiet ways I never did before, because I thought I could fix the narcissist. But now I know. The only person I ever needed to rescue was me. I'm still learning how to be mine again. After years of molding myself into something digestible, soft, accommodating, something he could tolerate, I've forgotten what it feels like to want something without guilt, to take up space without fear, to speak without rehearsing. I used to look in the mirror and hear his voice louder than my own. You talk too much. You're overreacting. You always make everything about you. Those phrases became my inner monologue. Automatic, cutting, his. That's the thing about narcissistic abuse. It doesn't just change how you see them. It changes how you see yourself. And then it keeps changing you, even after they're gone. I've been out of that relationship for months now. Maybe years if you count from the day he really stopped seeing me. But the trauma doesn't move out when they do. It lingers. It hides in your reactions, in your silence, in your attempts to trust someone new and feeling sick for it. The hardest part? Realizing I stayed because I thought that was love. Because I thought if I just held on a little longer, gave a little more, he'd finally look at me the way he used to in the beginning. That magical, almost supernatural way. The one that said, "You're everything I've ever wanted." But it was never about me. It was about how well I fit his illusion. And when I started needing things, like honesty, consistency, respect, the illusion cracked. So he punished me, with silence, with distance, with those long, drawn-out sighs that made me feel like asking for a hug was somehow selfish. It was emotional abuse, disguised as, "You're too sensitive." He called me intense, but what he meant was inconvenient. He called me dramatic, but what he meant was difficult to control. I wasn't too much, I was just too aware, and that terrified him. Love from a narcissist always comes with a receipt. You'll pay for every moment they made you feel special. Now, I'm learning to love without permission, to cry without shame, to exist without explanation. I don't always succeed. Some days I still wake up expecting the silence. I still check my tone before I speak, still feel guilt for needing reassurance. But other days, I breathe deeper. I don't flinch when someone says my name gently. I don't feel small in a quiet room. I don't chase closure from someone who never gave me truth to begin with. I'm starting to understand that I don't miss him. I miss the version of myself that believed in healing through love, before I realized that some people will bleed you dry and call it connection. He never wanted to be fixed. He wanted to be worshipped, and I'm done worshiping ghosts. If he ever thinks of me, and I doubt he does, I hope he remembers the way I looked at him, because that look, that belief, that forgiveness, he'll never see it again. Not from me, not from anyone who knows what he is. And if you've ever loved a narcissist, then you know. The goodbye never really ends. It just echoes. And some echoes take a lifetime to fade. Some echoes, I'm learning, don't fade. They shape you. Not in the way love should, soft and expanding, but like erosion. Slow, invisible, brutal. I still carry him in how I flinch at raised voices, in how I over-explain when someone says, "It's fine," in how I brace myself for abandonment every time someone takes too long to reply. That's the long-term damage of narcissistic abuse. You stop believing in safety, even in yourself. I remember once near the end, I stood in front of him crying, not yelling, not accusing, just crying. And he stared at me like I was a stranger, unmoved, bored even. Then he said, "You're exhausting." That broke something in me that hasn't quite healed, because I wasn't asking for much. Just empathy, just humanity. But a narcissist doesn't recognize pain that isn't their own. I kept trying to show him my heart, thinking maybe if he saw how deeply I loved him, how fiercely I believed in who he could be, he'd meet me halfway. But that's the tragedy. He never intended to meet me at all. He just wanted to see how far I'd go. And I went far, too far, past every boundary, past every warning sign. I didn't fall in love with him. I fell in love with the idea of who he might become if I just held on long enough. And in the end, he didn't have to break me. I did it for him, piece by piece, while calling it love. You don't realize it at first, how deep the manipulation goes, how every little shift, in tone, in silence, in blame, is a move in a game you never agreed to play. You find yourself explaining your feelings like a defense attorney, tiptoeing around your needs like they're landmines. You begin to apologize just for existing wrong. Even after he was gone, I stayed behind in that emotional prison. I policed myself. I doubted every instinct. I missed him, then hated myself for missing him. That's what trauma bonds do. They don't break. They unravel, slowly, painfully, like tearing skin from bone. But somewhere inside all that ruin, something small survived. A whisper, a flicker, the part of me that still knew this wasn't love. That part saved me. I've stopped waiting for an apology that will never come. Stopped fantasizing about him showing up at my door, full of remorse. He won't, because narcissists don't return to fix the harm. They return to see if they still can. And if he ever does, I won't answer, because I'm not her anymore, the girl who begged to be seen, who thought her love could transform someone who only ever came to consume. I'm rebuilding from the ashes he left. And the woman rising? She doesn't shrink. She doesn't explain her pain to people who haven't earned the right to hear it. She doesn't confuse chaos with passion, or silence with depth. She is still healing, still learning, still mourning who she used to be. But this time, the grief is sacred, because it belongs to me, not him. And maybe I'll always carry pieces of that story, but they no longer define me. He broke me, but he doesn't get to keep me. And maybe that's the real ending. Not dramatic, not loud, not even satisfying. Just mine. No grand confrontation. No perfect closure. No apology I'll never receive. Just this quiet, persistent truth. I survived a man who tried to erase me. And now, every time I choose myself, in the smallest, softest ways, I win. He broke me, but I was the one who learned how to bleed and still rebuild. And somewhere in the ruins of everything he shattered, I found a voice that no longer asks to be heard. It simply speaks. And this time, It's saying goodbye, not to him, but to the version of me who thought I couldn't live without his love. She's gone. I miss her. I love her. But I'm not going back for her, because she belonged to the fire, and I'm finally walking out of the smoke.